Courtroom 3 of the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., was packed that morning. Not because of some high-profile criminal case, but due to the presence of a controversial rising legal figure, Amara Whitfield. At only 29 years old, Amara had made waves in civil rights law with her sharp mind and fearless litigation. Yet, many still underestimated her, not for lack of skill, but because of her skin color, gender, and youth. The case that day involved a group of minority workers suing a major tech corporation for systemic discrimination. Amara represented the plaintiffs. As she entered the courtroom in a navy blue suit, her hair neatly tied back and her eyes full of resolve, whispers rippled through the crowd. Then came a scoff. It came from none other than Chief Judge Malcolm Hargrove, a man well known for his subtle biases and patriarchal courtroom demeanor. "You're representing the plaintiffs?" Hargrove asked, looking over his glasses before cracking a half-smile. "Let's just hope you remember this is a courtroom, not your high school debate team." Laughter echoed lightly across the benches. Amara remained silent. She stood tall, eyes fixed directly on the judge. "I'm well aware this is a courtroom, Your Honor," she replied calmly but clearly. "And I hope you remember that you sit in a seat meant for justice, not personal bias." The courtroom fell silent. After Amara's measured yet bold reply, the tension in the room thickened. Judge Hargrove's expression tightened. He clearly wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a young black woman. He cleared his throat and signaled for the clerk to resume the hearing. Amara approached the podium, opening her worn leather briefcase. While other lawyers relied on tablets, she pulled out stacks of paper, each neatly tabbed and annotated. All eyes were on her, some skeptical, some curious, and others, particularly from the group of plaintiffs, full of hope. "Your Honor," Amara began, her voice steady, "this case isn't just about 6 workers being denied promotions. It's about the systemic discrimination that has quietly thrived within Talvex systems for years." A few of the corporation's attorneys murmured. An older man in a tailored suit began to rise, but Judge Hargrove waved him down, not because he agreed with Amara, but because he was intrigued by where she was headed. Amara pressed forward. "We have internal evaluations that were altered, emails that clearly show bias against employees of color, and HR reports that were deliberately concealed, only uncovered thanks to a courageous whistleblower." She held up a printed email and then handed copies to the court. In this email, Talvex's executive wrote, "We need more management that fits the company image, less of the street look, if you get me." "Yes, Your Honor, that's how they refer to their black employees." A low murmur spread through the room again. Judge Hargrove's face darkened as he banged his gavel for order. But this time, there was unease in his eyes. "Ms. Whitfield," he said, "you're making very serious allegations." "I'm not alleging, Your Honor," Amara replied. "I'm presenting facts, and I have the evidence." In the back row, the mother of one plaintiff wiped away tears. The whole courtroom seemed to hold its breath. The defense attempted to argue that the emails had been altered, but Amara smiled faintly. She had expected this. "That's exactly why I've brought in a certified digital forensics expert today to confirm the authenticity of every document." The courtroom doors opened, and a well-known IT expert stepped in and swore under oath, validating the emails. Judge Hargrove glanced from the documents to Amara. For the first time, the smug expression he wore so often began to fade. Amara Whitfield, the woman once deemed unqualified, had just delivered her first seismic blow to the courtroom. After the digital evidence was verified, the courtroom fell into near silence. Judge Hargrove, usually the dominant voice, sat quietly, staring at the documents before him. He was used to docile lawyers. Amara Whitfield was nothing like them. Amara turned to the plaintiffs. One of them, Calvin Moore, who had worked in the product development department for 12 years, took the witness stand. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes were steady. "Mr. Moore," Amara began gently, "can you tell the court why you chose to take part in this lawsuit?" Calvin took a deep breath. "I used to believe that if I worked hard and followed the rules, I would be recognized. But after being passed over for promotion 5 times without explanation, I started to realize something was wrong." Amara handed him a performance evaluation he had received years earlier. "Can you confirm that this is the original evaluation submitted by your team lead, before it was altered?" Calvin nodded and then looked toward Talvex's legal team. I found out later that my manager was pressured to change the positive remarks into negative ones, because I didn't fit the company image. A wave of whispers swept through the courtroom. Reporters began furiously taking notes. Amara then called other witnesses. An Asian-American female engineer denied a long-term contract, a Latino manager forced to train his replacement before being let go. Each had their own story, but the pattern was the same. Subtle discrimination masked behind vague phrases like, not a cultural fit, lacks leadership qualities, or doesn't reflect the brand image. After each testimony, Amara did not gloat. She simply nodded, as if completing another piece of a larger puzzle. And the courtroom began to see, she hadn't come here just to win a case, she came to expose a system. The defense team began to show signs of unease. Some whispered among themselves, others glanced nervously toward the cameras. Judge Hargrove furrowed his brow as a Washington Post reporter quietly slipped out, likely to file an early story. When Amara closed her argument, she turned to face the judge directly. I'm not asking the court to rule in favor of these people because they are minorities. I ask for justice because they are qualified, because they have evidence, and because they deserve to be treated fairly, just like anyone else in this room. The courtroom fell into total silence. No one laughed at Amara Whitfield anymore. After a short lunch recess, the courtroom resumed with a tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. The TV cameras remained fixed, capturing every gesture and expression. At the center of it all stood Amara Whitfield. Judge Hargrove motioned for the hearing to continue. This time, the lead defense attorney, Gregory Lattimore, a white legal veteran with over 30 years of experience, rose to speak. Lattimore walked to the podium, his face betraying a hint of disdain. With his perfectly combed silver hair and steady, measured tone, he began his rebuttal. Your Honor, he said, while the testimonies presented by the plaintiffs may be emotional and compelling, they don't prove systemic discrimination. These are subjective interpretations based on personal experiences. Amara remained seated, her sharp eyes never leaving him. And, Lattimore continued, it is my belief that constantly attributing every career setback to racism only weakens the competitive spirit of our workforce. A murmur of disapproval spread among the plaintiffs. Amara slowly stood. Permission to respond, Your Honor? Judge Hargrove nodded. The courtroom held its breath. Amara walked to the center. Mr. Lattimore is right. We shouldn't blame every hardship on racism. But we also cannot ignore repeated, patterned behavior with documented evidence and consistent consequences on a specific group of people. She paused and turned directly to Lattimore. You call the testimonies emotional. Then please explain why 7 employees, from different departments, races, and years, were all denied promotion for the same vague reasons, only to have white colleagues with less experience promoted into those exact roles. Lattimore squinted, but said nothing. You say this is subjective interpretation. Yet not once have you disproved a single piece of physical evidence, from emails to performance reviews to eyewitness testimony. All of it lines up, and all of it points in one direction. Amara moved toward the center of the courtroom, her voice rising with clarity and strength. That the system your company operates under has, whether by neglect or intent, consistently excluded minority employees. Reporters exchanged glances. One scribbled, Amara flips the courtroom. Lattimore, growing impatient, stepped forward to counter. Ms. Whitfield, you certainly speak well, but perhaps you should spend more time understanding how corporations truly function. This is not a place for feelings. Amara smiled. I understand corporate culture just fine, Mr. Lattimore. It's where a black woman has to work twice as hard to be seen as half as capable. But here, in this courtroom, it's not about feelings. It's about justice. The courtroom erupted in nods and whispers of approval. Judge Hargrove banged his gavel for order, but the cold mask on his face had cracked. He now looked at Amara with something new, recognition, and maybe even fear. The humid afternoon outside was nothing compared to the rising heat inside courtroom 3. The trial had reached a boiling point after Amara Whitfield publicly cornered the lead defense attorney. But no one could have predicted that the biggest shock of the day was still to come. Your Honor, Amara said calmly but firmly, we would like to call our next witness, a former senior executive from Talvex Systems, Elliot Branson. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Elliot Branson was a familiar name, the Northeast Regional HR Director for Talvex, who had suddenly resigned 4 months ago under mysterious circumstances. Until today, no one knew why. The doors opened. Elliot entered in a slate-gray suit, thin but composed, his eyes locked on Amara. He nodded once, a quiet thank you. "Mr. Branson," Amara began, "during your time at Talvex Systems, were you ever instructed to alter or remove personnel records of minority employees?" Elliot inhaled deeply, scanning the courtroom, then looked straight at the judge. "Yes. I was told to adjust records of at least 11 black employees to lower performance scores or mark them as culturally incompatible, without any objective basis." Murmurs spread. Lattimore stood immediately. "Objection! This witness no longer works for the company. His testimony is speculative." "I have emails to prove it," Elliot interrupted, his voice steady. "I sent the full copies to the plaintiff's counsel before today's hearing." Amara raised a folder toward the judge. "Your Honor, these internal emails include directives from division executives instructing Mr. Branson to eliminate disruptive cultural elements and align workforce development with brand-compatible standards." One email read in bold, "Amara Whitfield is trouble. If she ever represents any of our people, crush her early." The courtroom exploded. Mouths hung open, cameras whipped around to catch the reaction of Judge Hargrove, who was gripping his armrest tightly. Elliot closed with a trembling but determined voice. "I stayed silent out of fear, of losing my job, of financial ruin, of the system. But when I saw Amara standing up and fighting, I knew I couldn't be part of the silence anymore." Amara stood still. She didn't need to say anything. The courtroom had already shifted from skepticism to respect. The defense team was in full retreat. Lattimore stared at the table, silent. Talvex executives whispered frantically. Phones buzzed non-stop. The fallout from this testimony had already spread beyond the courtroom. Judge Hargrove announced a 30-minute recess to review the newly submitted evidence. But no one left their seat. They all knew an earthquake had just struck, and it began with the woman they once called unqualified. As soon as the court recessed to review the new evidence, reporters flooded the federal courthouse lobby like a swarm of bees. In years of coverage, few civil cases had rocked the media and social networks like this one. But amid the flashing cameras and rising voices, Amara Whitfield stepped out quietly. No PR team. No entourage. Just a worn smartphone and a folder in her hands. Yet every step she took commanded attention. A CNN reporter approached, microphone in hand. "Ms. Whitfield, do you have anything to say to minority workers across the country after today's testimony?" Amara paused. She looked straight into the camera. Her voice wasn't loud, but it silenced the entire hall. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who has seen too much silence. And silence, sometimes, is complicity. Today isn't the day I won. It's the day people like Calvin, Yara, Mr. Branson were finally heard. If a woman once called unqualified by a federal judge can be heard in court, then so can anyone else." The crowd fell silent. A young black reporter wiped away tears. A law student clenched her fist behind a marble column, eyes glistening. Back inside the courtroom, Judge Hargrove returned to the bench, his face tense. He knew this case was no longer in his control. The press was ignited, the public enraged, and if he tried to protect Talvex now, his own career might be on the line. That afternoon, the judge announced that the case would proceed to a full-scale federal investigation, a level of scrutiny rarely approved in internal company matters. Amara said nothing in response. She simply looked up at the courtroom ceiling, where the phrase "equal justice under law" was carved. And for the first time, those words felt real. On social media, the hashtag Whitfield effect began trending nationwide. Clips of Amara's testimony were reshared across platforms. People began calling her the spark of a new legal movement. Major media outlets scrambled to book her for interviews, panel discussions, and mentorship programs for young attorneys. She declined most of them. In one simple post, Amara wrote, "I don't want to be a symbol. I just want the law to stop bending for bias." Not long after the trial advanced to a full federal investigation, Talvex Systems launched its next move. The tech giant's executives knew they couldn't beat Amara in the courtroom, but outside, in the battlefield of public opinion, they still had cards to play. One morning, as Amara stepped out of her modest office in Columbia Heights, her phone buzzed relentlessly. Emails, texts, social media alerts, all pointing to a viral video making waves online, titled, "Amara Whitfield, a fraud hiding behind justice?" In the video, a man claiming to be a former colleague accused Amara of accepting money from political groups to build her personal brand, manipulating facts for media attention, and coaching witnesses prior to trial. Tabloid headlines followed swiftly. Ambitious black lawyer, or a carefully scripted political act. The truth behind the woman shaking the federal courts. Talvex hits back. We won't stay silent. Amara immediately recognized this for what it was, a calculated smear campaign. No one but Talvex's legal team had the resources, or motive, to orchestrate such a blitz. But instead of retreating, she scheduled a small press conference at a public library. She didn't speak for long. She simply opened her laptop, played a video of Elliot Branson's sworn testimony, and held up a printed email that read, "If Amara Whitfield ever represents one of our people, crush her early." "I don't need to defend myself," Amara said. "The evidence already has." The press conference didn't defuse the backlash, it magnified it. But this time, young lawyers across the country began speaking up in support of her. A student organization at UCLA launched a petition with the slogan, "We are the Whitfield generation." Prestigious law firms, previously hesitant, called for an industry-wide review of corporate discrimination. The U.S. Department of Labor got involved. Corporations nationwide quietly began internal audits, terrified of becoming the next Talvex. Major networks invited Amara to primetime interviews. She declined most of them. Instead, she spent her time mentoring minority law students at a local D.C. community college. One student asked her, "Aren't you afraid they'll destroy your reputation?" Amara smiled. "I didn't build a reputation to protect it. I built truth to make justice stronger." 3 months after the explosive trial, America watched the results of one of the largest corporate internal investigations in modern history, a comprehensive federal probe into Talvex systems, conducted by the Department of Labor, the EEOC, and the U.S. Attorney General's Office. On September 14th, the findings were announced at a special press conference in Washington, D.C. From the podium, the Attorney General stated, "Our investigation uncovered clear and systemic patterns of discrimination against minorities, particularly women of color, persisting at Talvex systems for over 7 years. More than 40 internal emails, 18 audio recordings, and testimonies from 23 former employees were released. Some documents revealed executive-level directives to prevent promotions for employees associated with minority social groups. Talvex stock plummeted 31% within 48 hours. 2 executive vice presidents and 3 HR directors were forced to resign. The chairman of the board announced he would step down temporarily pending further review. And through it all, the name Amara Whitfield graced the headlines, not with mockery, but with respect. At a small ceremony at Howard University, where Amara once studied law, she was honored as a justice trailblazer. When asked to speak, she simply said, "I used to sit in the back of this library reading about Thurgood Marshall and thinking, how could I ever be like him? Now I know, you don't need to be great to change the system. You just need to refuse to stay silent." The following day, another tech giant announced plans to rework its hiring practices and invited Amara to serve as an honorary advisor. She declined. Instead, she and a group of young attorneys she mentored launched a nonprofit called Equal Justice Initiative for Workers, offering free legal counsel to employees facing workplace discrimination nationwide. Amara was no longer the black woman insulted in court. She had become the spark of a generation willing to stand for justice. A quiet afternoon settled over a small neighborhood on the outskirts of Baltimore, where Amara Whitfield was born and raised. After months of battling courtrooms, media storms, and relentless pressure, today she returned to the old wooden house that held someone who had been watching her every step, even if he never said a word. Her father, Clarence Whitfield, was a retired shipyard worker. A quiet, stern man with rough hands and an even rougher view of the world. During Amara's years in law school, he'd often shake his head and say, "Law's a white man's game, girl. You're going to get crushed in that machine." Amara stepped into the house, still scented with oil and strong black coffee. Her father was in his favorite worn armchair, staring at the television, playing a news segment showing Amara's press conference after the Talvex investigation findings. He didn't turn when she entered. He simply muttered, "That girl speaks pretty well." Amara chuckled softly, settling beside him. "I know you're not one for the media, Dad, but they're calling me the voice of a new generation." Clarence smirked. "A new generation's gonna need guts, smarts, and heart. You've got all three." He paused, then set the remote on the table without taking his eyes off the screen. "I was wrong. I thought they'd break you. But you didn't just survive. You made the whole damn system tremble." For the first time, Amara saw her father's eyes welling with tears. "You don't need to win every case, Amara," he said quietly. "Just don't lose who you are." She nodded, placing her hand gently over his. They sat like that, no more words exchanged. What needed to be said had been spoken through silence, the unshakable language between two generations. Weeks later, The Atlantic published a profile calling Amara the attorney of the unheard. But for Amara, the greatest title she ever earned was the daughter who changed her father's view of justice. That afternoon, the main auditorium of Columbia Law School was packed. Over 1,200 students, professors, and young lawyers gathered for one reason: a special keynote by Amara Whitfield, the woman who had shaken the legal world with the Talvex case. There were no flashy lights, no intro music. When Amara stepped up to the podium, the audience rose in applause, standing, clapping, for nearly 2 full minutes. She wore a simple white blouse and black slacks, no dramatic makeup. But when she began to speak, the room fell into awed silence. "I was once called unqualified, laughed at, for being a woman, for being black, for daring to walk into rooms where people like me weren't welcome. But what kept me standing wasn't my degree. It wasn't victory. It was knowing I was doing what was right." She paused, scanning the hundreds of faces in the crowd. "I didn't come here to tell you that you will change the world. I came to tell you that the world desperately needs to be changed. And it needs people who don't bow, who don't stay quiet, who don't give up, even when they are most underestimated." A first-year law student blinked back tears. A senior professor gripped his colleague's hand. The entire hall was cloaked in the sacred quiet of inspiration. Amara stepped back, ready to end her speech, then turned again, unscripted. "If you ever think you're too small to make a difference, remember this: a single spark can burn down an entire forest of injustice. And you are that spark." The next day, a student etched that line into a wooden door on campus. The photo spread across law schools nationwide. And the movement #BeTheSpark was born. Amara Whitfield was no longer just a lawyer. She had become a living symbol of hope, resolve, and the power of truth in a world often ruled by prejudice. Her story reminded us that when you dare to rise, you never rise alone.